You're very welcome to our meeting, to our lecture, let's say, which is going to be given to us by Paul. And I'll just give you a very brief, well, not very brief, but an outline of Paul's bio. Okay? So before I start, I want to thank Catherine very, very kindly, because there was nothing happening up here technologically. It was all dead, except for Catherine. We've been a bad way. Thank you, Catherine. Now, I have one excuse. We are a historical and archaeological society. We're not supposed to know about technology. That came after our time. Okay, so Paul, you're very welcome. You're from Patrick Swell, and you're treasurer of the Munster G.A.A. since just January 26. He holds a degree in economics and an MBA from Dublin City University, and works with the McManus team at Martinstown Stud. Previously, yes, impressive. Previously, he worked as a senior executive with Limerick City and County Council for 31 years. Prior to his election as Munster Treasurer, Paul was a member of the Limerick G.A.A. County Executive for the past 10 years and is a serving member of the Board of Directors of the Limerick Gaelic Grounds currently. During his 5 years as a member of the Archaeological of the G.A.A. in Croke Park, he served on numerous national committees and currently sits on the National Finance Management Committee of the G.A.A. So can I ask you please to welcome Paul, and we're all looking forward to his lecture.
Thank you.
I'll go behind you there now.
Okay. Thank you, Ron. Can you hear me okay, everybody? Thank you. I feel really privileged to be here tonight. Hugely respect everything that Thomond Archaeological and Historical Society does, and thank you for all of it. And it has been a real privilege to actually research and try to prepare a few words tonight on the history of the Gaelic Grounds, because, everyone will have their own sort of memory, their own thoughts and feelings of it. I was fortunate enough to grow up in Patrick Swell, and I think it's fair to say we had decent players coming up through the decades, and I felt so privileged to be able to grow up amongst my heroes. So going in with my friends and my neighbours, my parents, my uncles, etc., to the Gaelic Grounds, and you see the likes of Richie Bennett or Sean Foley or Frankie Nolan or Phil Bennett and these guys playing was just an exhilarating privilege. And we grew up then, fortunately, because there were so many influential people in the community who were so active in the club, highly aware not just of the hurling dynamic or the Gaelic football dynamic or others, but of the cultural dynamic of the Gaelic Athletic Association and what it stands for and how community-based it is. But look, you all know all of that already. So can I say as well, if I make a mistake, which I'm quite liable to do because I'm far from being a historian, or I wouldn't pretend to be, please feel free to pick me up on it or to hit me over the head and tell me I got it wrong, but just don't hit me too hard, 1926 in Limerick, a vibrant, bustling city. Not wealthy, but yes, there was an element of a tale of two cities. 20% of the housing was tenement-like, was unsanitized, impoverished almost. So the population of the city was about 38,000 based on the 1911 census. And the county, which was predominantly agriculturally focused, was about 104,000, I think, from the 1911 census. So overall, Limerick, as a city and county, about 142,000 people. Some wealthy, some large landholders in the county. In the city, there was very much a lot of poverty. But it was bustling, it was vibrant, there was people, there was activity, people coming and going from work, lots of bicycles, lots of activity around the city, and lots of political conversations. It was very politically engaged. we were emerging from a powerful and a particularly brutal political period like the Easter Rising, you know. There was the remnants of that were still lingering, the Civil War, very, very much so. The murdered mayors, 1921, to think that that was just marginally over 100 years ago. The powerful act, the brutality of that, the O'Donoghue, Joseph O'Donoghue in Janesborough, O'Callaghan and Clancy. The brutality, the two mayors murdered in our own city here. How savage was that? And we can never forget it, really, you know. And that was not that far back, 100 years ago, give or take. And Joseph O'Donoghue then similarly, and O'Donoghue Avenue in Janesborough is named after him. And then there was the whole Limerick Soviet. I mean, Limerick around that era, 1920-ish or there, just before and after, was very labour orientated. There was a strong labour movement coming from Cleves factory, the condensed milk factory. And again, there was a very, very strong dynamic of labour activity, which gave rise to the very famous Limerick Soviet. There was a fabulous play by Mike Finn there about 2 years ago, Make Bread, Not Profits. That was the dynamic. So strong labour. And you know, traditionally Limerick City, even up to the recent decades, has had a strong inclination towards labour representation. And what a healthy, productive, positive thing that is. In the county, in terms of history, the Drumculloher Cinema fire in 1926 cost 48 people their lives. So that was such a tragedy, a huge tragedy in the county, which was immense, really, 48 deaths. And I know that in the community in Drumculloher this year, people are working very, very hard out there to remember that in the centenary of it this year. And I gather, I think Pat Savage is giving a talk to your society on that in a month's time or thereabouts. Correct me now if I'm wrong, but I think he is. So Limerick, 1926, politically alive, bustling, vibrant, a lot of poverty, a lot of struggles, a lot of pain, you know, the black and tans, the impact of all of that, and the Irish Republican Brotherhood. And I'm going to mention during this the impact of the Daly family in Barrington Street, which I'm going to comment on and maybe throw out to the floor a little bit, and a man called William P. Clifford, who there would be no Gaelic Grounds in Limerick only for William P. Clifford from Fedamore. Now, I've kind of ruined this slide because I got carried away with names, and please forgive me on it, but I'm just going to try and go through. I just want to give a mention to key figures, and I've mentioned William P. Clifford. He was elected in 1926 as the 9th president of the GAA. It was his 3rd time trying to be elected as president of the GAA. He was the 2nd ever president from Limerick. The first had been Frank Deneen from Ballylanders, who in 1913, he led the charge towards purchasing Crow Park on Jones's Road. So he actually led that. So there were quite strong leadership figures in Limerick in that time, heavily involved in GAA, which had been established in 1884 in Thurles, as you would know. So helping William P. Clifford towards the development of the Gaelic Grounds was Dennis Lanigan. And interestingly, the civic authorities were very active in it as well. I mean, the chairman of the county council was John McCormack, and the mayor of the city, Alderman P.J. Donnellan. They were both heavily active in the subsequent committee to fundraise for the development of the Gaelic Grounds, because, you know, 12 acres had been purchased by William P. Clifford in 1926 from a man called Charles Barry, who coincidentally is a relative of the current Limerick G.A.A. Secretary, Michael O'Riordan. So Barry's land was bought in Coolrain was the townland off the Ennis Road, and William P. Clifford led that. So also involved Brian Greene, a descendant of the hotels, Tim Humphreys, who was a fascinating man who played hurling with Limerick, and he owned what had been the old Patsy Nicholas's bar, if you like, on 5 Upper Gerald Griffin Street, 5 and 6 Upper Gerald Griffin Street. And he ran a bar in Upper Gerald Griffin Street, which was the go-to bar for Gaelic games for GA in 1926. So that still continues to this day with the Nicholases. A.L.B. Quinlan was on the commercials team, which the clubs represented the counties in that era. So in 1899, Commercials won the All-Ireland Senior Football title, and A.L.B. Quinlan was on that. He played with Commercials, who were a fine club in that era in Limerick. Seamus O'Callagh, the famous scribe, he wrote extensively in the Limerick Leader and others. Con Cregan, who was a well-known Redmondite. Con Cregan was heavily involved in the Redmondite drive towards, you know, a united Ireland by peaceful methods, and unfortunately that kind of filtered away around 1914, 1915. But Con Cregan was editor of the Limerick Leader and was a well-known nationalist, and was also serving on this committee. Dennis O'Dwyer, Charles Holland, Robert O'Brien, Pat Sadler, George Gleeson, Dave Kiley. I mentioned Dennis Lanigan, Michael Gleeson, Lawrence Ryan, John Carew, who was also a political and was a councillor and was a TD, after whom John Carew Park in South Hill was called. They were key activists in a rather challenging time, 1926 to 1932. They came behind William P. Clifford and fundraised for it. But the interesting thing I took from that when I researched it was that the civic authorities led it. The chair of the county council, the mayor of the city were both joint chairs of that fundraising committee, and they worked very, very hard. Then moving on into the 1940s, Canon Punch was a very famous figure in Limerick G.A.A. And I'll come back to Canon Punch later in the presentation. Jackie O'Connell, Dennis Lanigan was still there, and Humphreys, Seamus Gardner, Sean McCarthy, Mick Neville. His family donated Mick Neville Park, which is now a centre of excellence for the GA in Rathkeale. Seamus O'Callagh was still there, heavily active, and Mickey Fitzgibbon. And Mickey Fitzgibbon won 2 Munster championships with Limerick in the late teens, early 20s. He was a father-in-law of, some of you may have remembered Tim Foley. He was an Irish teacher in the CBS in Sexton Street and would have influenced many, but Mickey Fitzgibbon was his father-in-law. Moving into the 1980s, key figures, Dan Hickey of Na Pairc put in Trojan work in the grounds across every aspect of it. Paddy Quilligan, a former treasurer of Limerick G.A.A, a St. Patrick's man. There's a few St. Patrick's people here tonight. Jerry Bennett from my own club in Patrickswell put Trojan work in. Donald Fitzgibbon, a former chairman of the county board from Mungret St. Paul's, and Donald has been a lifelong and a very committed leader in GA circles in Limerick, and I'm delighted that Donald is here tonight somewhere. Donald, so thank you for coming in. It's lovely to see you, Donald. Rory Kiley was chairman of the county board for I think 13 or 14 years, around the period of the late 60s through to the beginning of the late 70s. Jimmy Hartigan, Ballybrown, was heavily involved then. Michael Fitzgerald of Kilmallock. Michael MacDonald was Croom. Noel Drumcool was a very, very influential figure. And there's an interesting kind of backstory to that. Let me come back to it. P.S. O'Rian was 33 years on the Central Council. P.S. was from Galbally. Dennis Holmes from Ula, former chairman. Pat Kelly from West Limerick. J.J. Kennelly, the jeweller on Wickham Street. Brendan Danaher from Castletown, Ballygrana, a former chairman. And of course, Declan Moylan. Noel Drumgrool was a fascinating man and put in huge work, particularly on the north of Limerick City. He was involved with Treaty Sarsfields. He worked with the ESB. And at a given point, I think it was late 60s, Noel and a few others were intent on purchasing a permanent ground for Treaty Sarsfields. They had been playing in Shelbourne Park, a fantastic, fabulous club, and the history reflects all of that. But Noel didn't get his way. There was a vote, and the vote was to stay where we are in Shelbourne Park and not to get into debt. And Noel then moved on and focused on the other side of the north side, which was the Cardavan area, and so Na Pairc was born. And look at the powerful club Na Pairc is now, and that was down to Noel Drumcool. I think Dan Hickey was involved in that. I can't stand over that, and a number of others who just moved on from Treaty. Na Pairc became an incredible club, and they're such a powerful club, and well done to them. And Treaty Sarsfields, sadly, and a huge, huge loss, a terrible loss to Limerick, declined. And then after the 1970s into the 80s, they dissipated. And what a tragedy that was for Limerick City GA and Limerick County GA. The quality of players that came from Treaty in Gaelic football and hurling was a huge loss. And the soccer and rugby took more control on the Thomond Gate side than of the city. And it's something that we've looked at and spoken about in Limerick G.A.A, about trying to rebuild it again. And but you know, it's a work in progress. It's a demographic challenge as well as everything else. And then the current board of directors is a small group. There's 4 of us on it. Liam Burke from Fedamore, former treasurer of Limerick G.A.A, is chairman. Mike O'Riordan, the county secretary, is a member. John Cregan, the former chairman of the county board, and myself are the 4 directors at the moment. And one of the projects we're heavily involved in is, you may be aware of it, the development of the Craigcora Centre of Excellence, and there's a planning application in there for 9 pitches to be developed for hurling, Gaelic football, ladies Gaelic football and camogie, and indeed wheelchair hurling as well, to be utilised in that centre, and it's in the planning process at the moment, so hopefully we'll get there, but that's still being under consideration. So, as I said, 12 acres purchased from Mr. Charles Barry, relations of Mike O'Riordan, at Coolrain in 1926. The official opening then was in 1928. There were 2 junior championship matches. South Liberties played Young Ireland's, and Claghon played the aforementioned Treaty Sarsfield. Mike O'Riordan still has the minute books of the Gaelic Grounds meetings in his offices, still with the county board, so they still physically exist. It's fascinating to go through them. Then in 1932, being driven by that list of names I gave you earlier, in 1932 work started to happen then in the Gaelic Grounds. The pitch got levelled, there was sideline seating put in, there was resurfacing done, there was boundary walls, etc. put in. And then a major project was the relocation of the Hogan Stand. The Hogan Stand in Crow Park was relocated from Crow Park to the Gaelic Grounds, second-hand stand, but Limerick didn't say no. That happened in 1958. Then in 1988, the Mackey Stand opened because the Hogan Stand was deemed unfit. So we had to put in, Limerick G.A.A had to put in a new stand, and that was opened in 1988, a momentous occasion. And in 2004, then the open stand, and Donald was involved heavily in that from Mungret there. The open stand, the North Stand as it's called, with 12,000 seats, was developed. Obviously, we've often tried to find a way to cover that stand, and it's complicated because there are issues with the height, there are issues obviously with the funding, and again, it's an ongoing challenge. So, but there's a great view over there. Many would say way better than the Mackey Stand. So, and hurling in Limerick at that time was buoyant, was exuberant. Very strong clubs, commercials, Young Ireland's, Treaty Sarsfields were winning All Irelands like in 1921, 1923. And an interesting fact around that time was the All Ireland in 1921. Bob McConkey of Young Ireland's was the captain of Limerick, a fabulous player who gave great service. Actually, the chairman of Ballinacurra Gaels is his grandnephew. I'm sure you've come across him. Oh, Hammy, what's the chairman of?
Buckley,
Owen Buckley, well done. And his father was Sean Buckley, and Sean, I'm sure, would have been around the Thomond Society in the past. So Sean Buckley and Owen Buckley were connected to Bob McConkey. But Bob McConkey was the first man to be presented with the Lee McCarthy Cup in 1921. He was the first person to be presented with that cup, which had been donated by Lee McCarthy. And his mother was originally from Crawford's Lane in Bruff. So that was quite relevant. Garrett Howard was an immense athlete at that time as well. Had played with Dublin, had played with Tipperary, had won, I don't know if he'd won All Irelands with all 3. He could have, but he was a tremendous contributor. And Liam, you'd know that. I'm putting you on the spot.
He won 2 with Dublin and 3 with Limerick.
2 with Dublin, 3 with Limerick. Yeah. None with Tipperary.
No, he was there with Tip for 2 years. He would have won probably Thomond Flesh medals with Tip.
Yes, yeah. But what an athlete! Maybe we should be celebrating Garrett Howard a little bit more. That's maybe a discussion we could have. Maybe it's you're so right, Hammy. Yeah, Liz Howard, and she was president of the Camogie Association as well, and was the first female contributor on the Sunday game when that started to happen there in the early 80s, with Michael Lester and those. So yeah, that's the connection there. But lads, very little would have happened except for the bravery and the enthusiasm of William P. Clifford. So he was described in some of the research I was doing as a stern sort of man, serious, very much serious about the ethos of Gaelic games, had connections in the IRB, was a good friend of John Daly. he loved the association. Like, I mean, born in 1849, so he was there for the birth of it from 1884 right through. And he worked with the Department of Agriculture as an inspector, and then later in his career, I think around his late 50s, Clifford became the chief inspector for Limerick and Clare, chief agricultural inspector. He was a former chairman of Limerick G.A.A. He was chairman then also of the Munster Council, and went on to become the president of the G.A.A. So, you know, the second ever Limerick person to be president, following Frank Deneen, who had been so influential as well. And a very noteworthy piece of history that that William P. Clifford achieved when he became president was that he insisted that 10% of every gate in the country went towards the development of county grounds, so that each county, ideally, the objective was, should have their own recognised, standout, profiled county grounds that, you know, effectively patrons would be proud to be going to see their county teams playing, to generate that sense of momentum and pride and commitment. So he engineered that, which was kind of the starting point for so many of the larger stadia then that kind of advanced. Then they started to get a stream of funding, and he was very much developmentally minded, and that helped him then obviously when he was moving then towards the 1926 act of buying the 12 acres from Charles Barry. Excuse me. But interestingly, he was quite ambitious. You know, he had this developmental mindset, not just games or political, etc. But he ran 3 times for the presidency of the GA. Not once, not twice, 3 times. The first time he was only beaten 4 votes by a man called, a man from Wexford, his name escapes me now, beat him by 4 votes. And William P. Clifford challenged him the second year then in 1925, and he was beaten by a bit more. But that didn't deter him. In the third time, and the man from Wexford had served his term, so he was stepping down, Clifford challenged again. On the third time, he became elected as president of the GA in 1926, which was a huge achievement, you know, coming from Limerick, coming from the challenges of Limerick, coming from, you can imagine a guy like this in 1926. You're what? You're buying 12 acres to go playing hurling and football, and we can hardly get we've tenement housing in our city. We're on our knees. We're after a civil war. What are you at? This is madness. Of course he was challenged like that. Of course he would have been. But he was steely. He was ambitious. He was a serious person. But, you know, reports indicate that he was a warm, very warm person when you got to know him and got familiar with his ideology. So that grounds development programme was unrivaled during his term, with 10% of all gates allocated towards this development objective. So well done, William P. Clifford. It wouldn't be there only for William P. Clifford's vision and determination and bravery. Personally, I think the man should be recognised a little bit more in Limerick. In fairness to Fedamore G.A.A., they call their grounds the Clifford Grounds, and they run an annual park, don't they? Yeah, they have. An annual tournament, an inter-county club tournament. So I give credit to Fedamore G.A.A. for that. But this was a national figure who's a serious leader. But I don't see anywhere that really recognised him enough. I could be wrong, and I stand open to be challenged on that. So in terms of the development side of it then, the phasing of it, forgive me if I'm repeating myself a little bit, 1932, the pitch being levelled. 1958, the Hogan stand coming in. Now that was a huge talking point. You know, you can imagine they're pulling up the Hogan stand and they're bringing it down in lorries from Dublin down to Limerick to put it up again. And there'll be fellas looking at that. That'll never work. That can't happen. You know, you can imagine the challenging and the fun around it. And Cannon Punch would have been heavily involved around that time. 1961 was a very famous date in the Gaelic Grounds. 61,174 people were registered as paid going into that final, right? So just to put that, that's 50% more than what were at Limerick and Cork last summer in the Gaelic Grounds in that final that went to penalties, that famous final. So it was completely jammed. People were up on top of each other. And then to make matters worse, the gates were knocked in and 10,000 more made their way in. And I'm wearing my treasurer's hat here, and they didn't pay getting in. They just pushed in the gates, made their way in. So how did it come that nobody actually was, God forbid, killed, not to mind hurted? There were a few injuries in the stadium on the day. I think a few leg breaks, that sort of thing. But But it wasn't Limerick, it was Cork and Tipperary. It was Cork and Tipperary, but you know, I've met people who had been at it, and it was palpably uncomfortable. People were fainting, and you know, it was palpably uncomfortable. There was no sort of chief fire officer influence or agency influence from the state at that time. So these matters helped to turn that around, I suppose, in terms of safety and so on. So the 1988 Mackey stand was completed. The Munster final was played there. I think it was Cork and Tipperary again in 88. I could be wrong. I think it was. And then in 2004, the new 12,000-seater stand and the 2 new terraces were brought to capacity, brought it to 49,866, a tremendous number. At that time, to help with the debt, JP McManus contributed €5 million, and that is worthy of mention and acknowledgement, in fairness. Down through the years then, up to now, up to, what are we at now, 2026, we're at 44,000 because of the chief fire officer and other state agency interventions, which, you know, obviously have to be respected. In 2012, new floodlighting went in. That was led by Mike O'Riordan and by Liam Lennon, the chairman of the county board at that stage, and they've been very, very successful also, the lighting. Around 2018, you know, we've often been challenged in the Gaelic Grounds, shouldn't you be running shows and concerts there? And fair enough, yeah, we should. But it's a hard sell. And we've tried so hard now. Certainly in 2018, we ran the National Geographic concert. It was run by the agency were CWB, and they did a great job. It was a beautiful, fabulous cultural night. There was the best of music there of a cultural nature, and we sold about 10,000 tickets, and it drew people in from all over the country. In fact, most of those that attended in 2018, I think our figures showed 70% were from outside of Limerick who came to attend that show. And you know, the big challenge we always had with getting concerts into the Gaelic Grounds was that the agents were slow to commit, because our numbers in Limerick would be less than, say, Cork or Dublin, obviously, and they weren't inclined to commit. So since 2018, we've had 4 or 5 other concerts, and they've worked out okay. We've made a certain amount of money on them, but it's a very hard work, very hard sell, because you have to pay the act, you know, and you have to make enough tickets to make that money. And if they don't sell, well, then you're digging into your reserves. So, you know, it's something we do have to review. Maybe we're as well off as a Gaelic Grounds to just continue to concentrate on the hurling and football. We've tried the concerts. It's a hard slog. That's where that lies. Then in 2019, with LIT, or TOOS as they are now, we agreed a naming rights arrangement, and it's now called the TOOS Gaelic Grounds, or TOOS Pairc na nGael. Back in 1987, there was an American football game there as part of Treaty 300, and then an Aussie rules game. I don't know if any of you remember it or you attended. An Aussie rules game was there in 2010. We put in a stadium gallery in 2018 and some tunnel gallery images in 2023, and they've worked really well. And you know, we were worried when they were installed in 2018 that kids will be hitting a slitter against them, or they'll get damaged, or unintentionally. But to be fair, they've never been damaged, and they stand proudly there, kind of reflecting the good days of Limerick G.A.A. across all of the genres, and that's nice. It actually needs a bit of updating now, because with the wins we've had in more recent years. And then one of the tunnels, the Limerick tunnel, has a lot of Limerick imagery, from the Mick Mackeys to the Leonard Enrights to the Joe McKenna's to the other greats. As the players are coming out, they see these faces as they're coming out of the tunnel to play a Munster Championship match, and that's nice. It has worked well. We think it's going well as well. But what's particularly endearing is that they've never been damaged, or, you know, which is a lovely fact. Now, this is a bit of a bugbear of my own. I mentioned William P. Clifford. Where is the recognition of William P. Clifford in our city and in our county? Well, look what he delivered for our city and our county with his team, with that committee. And what about the Daly family? I mean, you're the historians, you're the Historical Society, the Thomond Historical and Archaeological. And I'd love to get your thoughts on this maybe later as I finish up there, but a few more slides to get through. But John Daly was in the IRB, died in 1916, was a leading figure in the IRB. The Daly family lived on Barrington Street. They had a bakery on William Street, and his nieces and nephew committed so much to the journey of Irish nationalism. And I'm mentioning them because you're saying, why is he talking about the Dailies? The Gaelic Grounds is inextricably intertwined with the John Daly Cup, which Madge Daly, John Daly's niece, presented to Limerick G.A.A. to the chairman of Limerick G.A.A., William P. Clifford, in 1928. Madge Daly presented this most beautiful cup, and the very, very same cup, nearly 197 years, 98 years later, is still being presented, and is to the blue ribboned competition of Limerick G.A.A., which is the county senior hurling championship. So, like na Pairc won the senior championship last year, the club senior champion, and they have the John Daly Cup outside in the Pairc clubhouse at the moment. The same cup that Madge Daly presented on behalf of her uncle John Daly in 1928. Her brother Ned Daly was a lieutenant in the Easter Rising in Dublin and was executed as part of that in 1916. This family lived on Barrington Street in the heart of our city, very much IRB orientated, and the GA were very interlinked with the IRB. And that made the church a little uncomfortable, and there was a little bit of edge there always between the influence of the IRB in GA and the influence of church in GA. And it was an interesting dynamic in that period of time. I'm talking around now the time of the Rising, the Civil War, etc. And the Daly family, Ned Daly executed, John Daly, a man that spent 14 years in Chatham prison in the UK. He got to know Thomas Clark very, very well while in that prison. Thomas Clark then married Kathleen Daly. And Kathleen Daly was Thomas Clark's wife. Thomas Clark was the first signatory of the 1916 proclamation. He was the first name on it. It's often been said that Thomas Clark was probably more of a presidential role in that rising than Padraig Pearse, but he was more a background influencer, and Pearse was a fabulous orator, so he got the front of house role in that regard. But not to underestimate the national influence of the Daly family, who were heavily committed to GAA, heavily committed to the Irish Republican Brotherhood, the IRB. And when John Daly died in 1916 and Ned Daly was executed after the 1916 Rising, Ned Daly was one of a family of 9. He was the only boy in that family. The other 8 were sisters. And the girls lived away in Barrington Street and were repeatedly being visited by the Black and Tans, by British forces, and brought out onto the street and intimidated and humiliated and dragged around the city. It was a very, very tough, very challenging, brutal time, as I used that word earlier. And the Dalys were stoic right through it all. The Dalys were stoic. And for me, and maybe I'm missing something along this whole story, but I cannot for the life of me understand, and this is only a personal view, and forgive me now for articulating it, but where is the recognition of the Daly family in our city, in our county, for what they did? They gave their lives, and I'm only tipping the iceberg in terms of what they did. Kathleen Daly was involved in forming Cumann na Mon. As I say, the John Daly Cup presented to Limerick G.A.A. And then, and Kathleen Daly then went on, even though her husband was executed in 1916, to be the first female lady mayor of Dublin in 1939. Kathleen Daly was the first female mayor of Dublin in 1939, a Limerick woman, a Limerick city woman from Barrington Street in our city. So I just kind of put it to the floor, where is the recognition? Where is the memory of this great family? I know there is Daly family in Janesborough, just like there is the O'Donoghue Avenue in Janesborough. But I just feel maybe they could be better remembered. And I will give credit to the Thomond Archaeological and Historical Society. I commend you on this, that 60 years ago, this same society organised for Eamon de Valera to unveil a plaque on Barrington Street acknowledging the same Daly family. So well done, Thomond. And it's just the point I'm just raising. It's something that is of interest. I may miss some story along the line. Now, 2 kind of narratives I have heard have been the church, and I can't stand over that, it's just a narrative. And then there was the murder of James Dalton on Clare Street in 1922. I think my dates are right there. And that was because of a split in the IRB, difficulties in the IRB after the 1916 Rising, because you know, the turnout was poor around the county. Why was that? There was acrimony, there was pain and hurt over all of that, and the executions, and so there were complications, and that was a very painful moment in Limerick history, that murder of Dalton, that shooting of Dalton, and it was linked back to a split in the IRB. And again, some narratives have been that didn't help the whole story, you know. But anyway, I just wanted to touch on it, and thank you for bearing with me. The great Mick Mackey, probably many would say the greatest hurler of all time. The great Mick Mackey, what can be said about the man? A legend, we've all heard of him. Limerick in the 1930s, and his father before him, Tyler, and his brother John. They were leaders in every sense of the word in terms of Limerick G.A.A. Their performances in the Gaelic Grounds were absolutely legendary. And unfortunately, a very turbulent and tragic moment happened in Limerick G.A.A. then, and it happened in the Gaelic Grounds, and I feel compelled to mention it, even though there's sensitivity around it, but I'll be as measured as I can. Canon Punch was the chair of Limerick G.A.A. at the time. Han were so dominating. Han were running. They were winning left, right, and centre. They were a tremendous club, and moves were made then to amalgamate Young Ireland's with Croom, and the county senior hurling championship match took place in the Gaelic Grounds between, Croom and Han, and a terrible accident happened. A man called Cregan tackled Mick Herbert, and it was deemed to be a tackle whereby the Gardaí got involved, and Cregan spent a year in prison, sadly, for the whole incident. With Mick Herbert was the hand player who got injured. It was historically in Limerick G.A.A. it was a huge moment because it shook Limerick G.A.A. to its foundations. And Mick Herbert was lucky to survive, and he went on to live a great life. He's a great family out there in Aha now, and he died, I'm not sure of the date, probably 15, 18, maybe, yeah, I shouldn't speculate now. 15 or 18 years ago, I would speculate. And he went on to become a Fianna Fáil MEP, and thank God for that he lived a full life. But it shook the GA in Limerick to its foundations. It was a tragic event happening in the Gaelic Grounds, and it set back Young Ireland's as well. The whole thing brought a lot of tension. So that's just a moment, as I say, to reflect on that was worthy of mention and an important moment. And what happened then, Limerick GA started to become less popular, and rugby and soccer became stronger. Now, soccer was always strong, but rugby gained ground then in that era, sort of from the 1940s. This happened in 1942, that event. So over that 20, 30 years, rugby became stronger, hurling was less popular. It was kids were almost afraid to be seen with a hurley. I mean, some people have told me that, like walking around the city with a hurley, it was an uncomfortable period. So, as I say, you had glory years with a Han, Croom, Young Ireland's, Patrick Swell has its era, and hopefully that's not over. The Pairc are having their era, and well done. And to Adair previously, Treaty Sarsfield's an amazing club. So sad to see them not alive still, you know, and Kilmallock. And of course, I'd put the question, where lies Gaelic football and the many, many outstanding Gaelic football players we've seen down through the years in the Gaelic Grounds? This was, I may not be able to read it, I'll try. I'm going to give it a little bit anyway. The death of Mr. William P. Clifford. With very sincere regret, we chronicle the demise of Mr. William P. Clifford, which took place in a Cork nursing home yesterday after a long illness. The deceased was one of the best known men in Munster. For many years up to his retirement, he was Chief Dairy Inspector under the Department of Agriculture, and in the discharge of his duties, he displayed energy, initiative and ability of a high degree. He was better known perhaps as a devotee of our national pastimes. For 20 years, he was chairman of Limerick County Board. Subsequently, he was elected chairman of the Munster Council and later on chairman of the Central Council and president. In recognition of his wonderful services, he was on his retirement made honorary president for life of all bodies. He had a thorough knowledge of the rules of the GA, and his decision on knotty points were always accepted without challenge. A gentleman of many excellent traits, he was held in high esteem and regard and spoken independently in a straightforward disposition. Behind what would seem to be A cold exterior, there was a warmth of feeling and a depth of human understanding that could not fail to establish himself in the affections of all who came to know him. His passing was removed a man of sterling qualities into his widow, son and brothers, Mr. T.J. Clifford, who was the district court clerk, and Mr. Sean Clifford, another brother, superintendent, home assistance officer for the county. We extend our heartfelt sympathy. And another article there by Seamus O'Cally that was on Come On from the Limerick Leader. Okay, so I'm getting close to the end, but sporting highlights, how can you pick one? There's just so many. My own personal one, and I'm sure many people here tonight will be Kieran Carey's point against Clare back in 1996. Clare beat Kerry in the football. Marty Morrissey's line of "there won't be a cow milked in Clare for the next whatever it was a great line. That was a great story, 1992. And then the All-Ireland Senior Football Final in 2014, which is only 11 years ago. That was a tremendous occasion. Kerry versus Mayo, and you might remember a large gentleman managed to jump the gate and his daughter running after him to come back, Dad. Do you remember that occasion? And the big man broke in. So, yeah, memorable. The Munster Final versus Cork 2013 when Donal O'Grady was the captain. The 1955 Munster Final, Mackey's Greyhounds and Dermot Kelly scoring a goal in 12 was a fantastic occasion. And then, of course, 6 in a row Munster Championships, many of them in Limerick. The homecomings, and I was very honoured to be part of this arrangements and the whole 2018, the Limerick team coming home off the train in 2018. How could you ever forget it? Like the emotion of it all, the joy of it all. We had a lovely summery evening. The Gardaí were fabulous in their organising, and everything went according to plan. We had a lot of musical acts. Denise Chyla was there, Hermitage Green were there, Bioiga were there. Everyone wanted to be there, like everyone wanted to be at that homecoming. And Derek Smart, the chief superintendent at the time, advised us that the attendance overall between Gaelic Grounds and the city was 120,000 people in the city that night, and there was no incident. It was fabulous. And similarly, we had another one in 22, and then in the Gaelic Grounds, obviously, and then with the city council, we had the discussions, and they wanted to have an impact in the city centre, and we concurred with that. We held the 2023 homecoming down on Perry Square and used the People's Park as a kind of an offshoot, and that worked very, very well as a dynamic as well. But you know, the amazing thing is the coming together of it all. You know, and I mean, I know sport. There are losers in sport, and you have to lose with dignity. There's community in it, but the coming together when you win, like what we experienced that 2018, no one will ever forget. Like, it was just beyond powerful. It was fabulous. It was magic. And I feel so lucky to have been part of the county board and involved in those homecomings. Eamon Cregan in the Gaelic Grounds after winning the Harty Cup in 1964. What a player Eamon Cregan was. He had it all, hadn't he? Fabulous man. The CBS Pipe Band, a lot of associations with great occasions there. And they still help out, and fair play to them. That's in 1972 in front of the old Hogan stand in the Gaelic Grounds. A section of the crowd, I don't know who put this one in, but Kilmallock won that county final 3-14 to 3-7. But anyway, it captures an era, 1975. I think I know a few faces in it. That's just one in front of the new Mackey stand then, just in 1992. Phil Bennis is there with a few of the players, the Garveys and the Careys. That was the redevelopment then taking place just after Donald Fitzgibbon's chairmanship, and the 12,000-seater open stand was under construction there, you can see. Now, I'm going a little bit off centre here, and I'm very close to the end, but I spoke a lot about the Daly family and the need. Where is the recognition? That's the question I'm putting to the floor. And I spoke about William P. Clifford, where is the recognition? A great friend of John Daly was Joseph Kevin Bracken from Templemore. He was one of the 7 people involved in the forming of the G.A.A. in 1884 in Thurles. J.K. Bracken died at 52 years of age and is buried in Tankerstown in Kilmallock. His son, Brendan Bracken, moved away from the family and went on a different journey altogether and became the chief political advisor of William Churchill, Brendan Bracken. And Brendan Bracken formed the Financial Times. He was a writer, he was a contributor, and he was basically Churchill's right-hand man. But interestingly, J.K. Bracken and John Daly were very, very close in terms of the IRB and very, very close in terms of the G.A.A. And J.K.A. Brackett is buried in Tankerstown, and Limerick G.A.A., to our credit, and I'm singing a bit of Limerick G.A.A.'s song here, but sometimes we get forgotten about. Limerick G.A.A. actually put a plaque on that headstone on his anniversary, I think about 12 years ago, acknowledging his contribution to Gaelic games and to history, the history of the country. And he died, he fell out, he had some issue in Templemore, moved to Kilmallock at age 50. 2 years later he died of cancer, and he's buried in Tankerstown. Not far from there, in Thomond graveyard, is the only Limerick man murdered in Bloody Sunday in Croke Park, which was a man called Tom Hogan. He's buried in Thomond graveyard. And it's not a bad journey to make now if you want to have a look at that, you know. Thomond graveyard to find Tom Hogan's grave, and we acknowledged that in 1916, Limerick G.A.A. We had a wreath laid there. Or was it later? Might be wrong on my year there now. It could be 2020, 2021 maybe. 2021 I think, yeah. Yes, it was COVID times anyway. So J.K. Bracken in Tankerstown and Tom Hogan in Thomond. So that's an overview of the Gaelic Grounds in 1933. You can see there the Ellis Road coming in along here. You had a few of the houses. There was no Highfield estate there, and in along then, that's it into the city centre. So that's the Gaelic Grounds. There wasn't no sign of a house around it at all, but it looks great, doesn't it? And then this one is from the 1952 Munster final between Cork and Tipperary, July the 13th. There was 43,236 there. A little bit of development you can see. I think that could be our Ardue House and Roses Avenue up there, but that's again the Gaelic Grounds there, 1952. This is the famous 1961, and I'd say the camera was afraid to get a close up on that one. But yeah, when you think about that, 70,000 people crushed in there, like, is, yeah, high risk. And then I'm coming near the end now. This is the great William P. Clifford. None of it would have happened without William P. Clifford. It's great to remember him tonight, isn't it? Isn't it lovely just to think about him and to think about the dailies and to think about the fabulous history around it. Limerick, a struggling city in that time, and still men and women had the bravery and the ambition to go out and buy that land in Coolrain. In the context of everything that happened, murdered mayors in 1921, all that brutal, cruel, painful energy, but still people had that ambition. And yeah, so just as I conclude, I want to say a huge thank you to Liam O'Brien for the help and the advice and the photographs. Liam, thank you. Michael Reardon, the Secretary of the County Board. Kieran O'Griff, a good friend of mine, and Pat Fitzgerald. I see Pat there. Lovely to see you, Pat, as well. Best of luck with your book launch a few weeks' time. Kieran, on the 4th Earl of Dunraven, isn't it? Yep. And Kieran was a very studied person on the Daly family and John Daly. Matthew Potter, who's here, Dr. Potter is here tonight, thanks for that. And Sean Curtin, some of those are his photographs. I will have made loads of mistakes here. I've given it my best shot. I'm very, very honoured to be here to speak to you tonight, and I hope you found it enjoyable. Thank you.